PhDs free writing consultations. And this will be in regard to any piece of writing that you may have to do in your department or discipline. Right from your first seminar paper, or maybe even your syllabus, all the way through to articles and postdoc opportunities and applications. We are going to have both drop-in hours and appointments. The appointment button is right there. You just click on it and you can go right into the process. Or you can drop in Monday through Thursday, noon to 5 in the university office building. That's where all the grad prep services are. And I, at least right now, I'm in room 101, which they'll probably move me out of. But if you come to the building, that's where all these services are. I have actually been studying different genres of graduate writing since early June when I was given the job. And I last year spent time in CNAS as well, helping professors with their grant proposals. I actually have submitted a couple myself that we're waiting on right now. So I have tried to educate myself, and there are other folks who are going to be coming in to help out with your writing from other departments. So we're pretty equipped to handle any of you from any department. And what we don't know, we'll go and find out and help you get to it. Later on in the fall, we'll also, just those people who came in, make sure you sign up on the sign-up sheet that's going around. Later on in the fall, I'll start running a series of workshops which will be about writing, different aspects of writing. I think the first one is probably going to be a friend of mine who works as an academic editor at Dartmouth and Middlebury colleges. He's going to come in and talk about article publishing and some ins and outs of that. And then we'll continue on throughout the year with more workshops. They will be posted on this site as well, so you can check them out. Let me introduce myself to you. I am, like yourselves, a graduate student. This is my 6th year. I am a PhD in the English department, and I have a chapter and 2/3 done of my 5 for my dissertation. As you can tell, I've been around a bit. This is my 28th year in education, mostly as a secondary school, private secondary school teacher on both coasts. But here, in the last 5 years, I've taught English 1 ABC, which is the required 3-course freshman writing component. I've also taught ELWR, which is a couple courses there, which is designed to help our second language learners enter the main requirements. And I was also a past assistant director for a course called 1B, which is argumentative writing. If you work in the UWP, you will have an assistant director. You will take a course in the English department, it's 301. And so as you teach your first year, you'll have meetings once a week where you can talk about what's going on, what the next assignments might be coming up. But not all the departments have that. And that's why you have TADP, and you also have the University Teaching Certificate Program, and you have the Graduate Student Mentoring Program to help you with your TA-ships and your teaching. So again, what the departments don't provide you, our new organization is attempting to do. And it's going to take a couple of years to get everything up and running, but you know, we're working on it already. I was fortunate enough last year to be voted the Outstanding TA from the English department, and I just finished off a 10-year career working in Hollywood as a story analyst, and you may have seen some of the movies I read. Brokeback Mountain was one. I used to work for Focus Features. So I got some professional work out of that. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about today are 2 things. One is learning styles, and these are the ways that students learn, or at least we believe they learn. And the other is how you would respond to that, which would be obviously in terms of pedagogical choices. So I'm going to start by reading you a little bit on the background of this, because it is a very contested set of theories. So let me start with this, and then we'll move on through the rest of the presentation. First, broadly discussed in the modern context in the late 1970s, learning styles and intelligence theories always have been aimed at finding ways to produce better classroom results and enhanced educational outcomes for students. The idea of meshing is simply that there are many ways to learn, to apprehend the world, and that if we as teachers can identify and cater to those specific modes of learning, then we can greatly enhance the experience for students who learn in those specific ways. Through the 1980s and 1990s, numerous theories were advanced about the nature and number of these varied learners and their multiple intelligences, with the assertions ranging from colds to experience-based categories, concrete and abstract, and 2 response theories, reflective or active. Through Gregor's focus on perception with concrete, abstract perceptual qualities and random sequential ordering abilities, to Fleming's neuro-linguistic VARK model of 3, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, to Gardner's 7, later revised to 9, multiple intelligences, logical, mathematical, spatial, linguistic, bodily, kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalistic, and existential. And finally, all the way to a 2004 British study which found 71 types of learning styles. Please don't ask me to list them. The wide variation of approaches and intelligences itself was critiqued, but counterclaims also were based on the inability of research to show that there was any significant student improvement from a strict matching of learning style to particular pedagogy. Then, a now infamous 2009 critique by the the Association for Psychological Science, even discredited the methodological base of the research itself, and the arguments erupted all over again. So, the question for us today seems to be, should teachers consider learning styles when planning and structuring classroom learning activities? My answer will be an unequivocal yes, but maybe not for the reasons you might imagine. Now, how many of you thought, dear God, is he going to stand here for 40 minutes and read off a piece of paper? I'm not going to do that. How many of you can tell me what meshing is? Can anyone tell me what meshing is?
So based on what you said, it's finding the teaching strategy that meshes well with the learning sort of style of the student.
You, sir, are an auditory learner. Right? So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be manipulating the heck out of you, first of all, right? So everything I'm doing, and don't worry, I'm not quite as boring as I may have just seen. That was intentional, right? But what I'm going to try to do is show you how some of these styles work and how you can use them. But I've got a subtext here. And so we're talking about learning styles and how to help kids, but I've got something else going on. So think what that might be. But let me take you the next step and just show you a little bit about this. Oh, actually, before I do that, so you've heard a little bit about the approach. What do you think might be some of the good things, maybe, and some of the bad things about trying to use this? Trying to mesh, trying to figure out what pedagogies work with which learning styles in your classes. What might be some of the good and bad things about doing that you can imagine before I show you more? Go ahead.
Well, a bad thing would be is that you're not always going to be able to cater to each individual student.
Right.
Right.
You're going to do 71 things in 50 minutes, so you catch every one of those learning styles. It's going to be tough, right? Go ahead.
Some disciplines just lend themselves to certain learning styles better than others.
Right? You're also going to see that there's certain types of material that you may be better taught certain ways from a pedagogical perspective, so that complicates it. How about this? Suppose you have a kid who's, you're going to meet them in a second, is what we call a tactile kinesthetic learner, right? Which means you got to get your hands all over it. And you've got, I don't know, you've been teaching them about Eisenberg, right? Is it Eisenberg, right? The uncertainty principle? I'm not a scientist, right? So how are you going to have a student take a test kinesthetically to show that he or she knows what the uncertainty principle is? Maybe they won't show up for your room, maybe they will, right? They'll be in the vicinity somewhere. But the idea is that, because that's all I know about Eisenberg. But the idea is that you're going to catch as much as you can. Because even the cognitive theorists aren't sure about all this. Here's what happened. The problem was this, right? That when they sat the auditory learners down and taught them auditorily, they learned a lot of stuff, and they all seemed really happy. And then when they sat them down and just instructed them visually, they learned a lot of stuff, and they feel really happy. And so the outcomes were what they were supposed to be. And what Gardner says, the 7 to 9 multiple intelligence, he's very popular right now, is that there's this overlapping, right? That we're all sort of bits and pieces, and that there may be no pure way of looking at it. So, while we do this, hold on, while I show you this next little bit here, I do want you, and throughout all of this really, I want you to kind of think about yourselves, right? Now in your packets, you don't have to go looking for this, but I have put a website address in for you that is one of the better, quicker, and easier self-learning assessments. And so go take that. It'll take you about 5 minutes. They won't try to sell you anything, and at the end of the 5 minutes, after you've answered a bunch of multiple choice questions, they'll try to diagnose your learning style. Okay? But let me give you a little more information about it, and we can proceed. Let's see if the magic's going to work today. Okay, so we're going to basically, the VARC system is pretty solid, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to not using that. Yes, we are. And what we're going to do is we're going to go with 4 styles. And a lot of this is intuitive, right? So you have the auditory learners, you're going to have the visual learners, you're going to have visual auditory learners, and they are just, this is actually more a complex difference than you might think. And then my favorites, the tactile kinesthetics. Now, as I said, to have this make sense to you, and since you've all probably just moved in and you've just bought an awful lot of furniture for IKEA, right? You're going to have to figure out how to assemble it, right? And also, if you haven't bought your furniture from IKEA, you're going to have to figure out where Baranaka Street is. And it's like 35 miles that way. So you're probably going to need to deal with some maps. So how do you do that, right? When you get your IKEA boxes home, do you get a friend to help? Maybe the cat, as I do. She's pretty good at it. Do you look at the pictures and you know that IKEA's directions tend to be pictorial, not written, right? Maybe you will, oh God, the boring people read the manual, right? Because that actually has the actual directions. Or maybe you just do it like my brother, and when there's pieces left over, he's like, we'll just save them for the next thing we buy from IKEA, right? As long as the shelves don't fall out, it's okay. As far as the maps go, of course, that's guys. We all do that. We're all very easy asking for directions, right? Look at the map. Do you read the directions? You know, if you use MapQuest, you know they have both the map and the written directions. So which do you tend to rely on to get where you're going? I know Garmin's taking that all out, right? Or do you just do it, again, follow your nose, find your way from familiar landmarks. We don't know where we're going, but we're sure as heck going to get there, right? So those are the more kinesthetic approaches. But here's what you've got. You've got a whole lot of abilities, a whole lot of learning styles, and how are you going to keep them busy and satisfied and happy and learning? So let's go through each one in detail. Now, we're not going to do this for the rest of the class either, right? So I've got another thing planned. So as you're watching this, you're going to see the 4 categories of learners. Just try to remember what characterizes them. But as I said, it's very, very intuitive. So auditory learners obviously listen, right? But we don't call them oral, AU. We call them auditory because they also need to speak, right? And these folks like reading aloud. They don't have a problem with it. But the real thing they can do in class that really works is talk to each other, right? Because they're engaging both sides of the ability. So you can imagine what pedagogies might work. Group work with these folks, having them teach each other. I'll say more about that in a while. They use music. I had a girl in my 1B class a couple years ago. She had her earbud in for, you know, she got through the first 2 classes, then I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? This girl had devised a mnemonic system based on the songs of Lady Gaga. She memorized the entire bloody course using the songs as ways to trigger her memory. She was an A student by the end of the class. I let her keep the earbud in. You're going to see things like that, right? These folks use audio tapes. They want to see things over and over. As you know, novels are on audio tape now. But what we've got is a lot of textbooks now being added. So these kids would like to, you know, hear their sources over. And then there's my old brother again, my younger brother. I hated him until he was an adolescent because all he had to do was read something once and he memorized it. He had an oral memory. I would study it for 4 months and forget half of it, right? But this is really, really important. And think if you do this, right? You've got a test coming up. You write an outline. You try to cut the outline down, and then you try to memorize it. You walk around your apartment babbling, okay, I got to do, you know, this, and this. I got to remember this, and that. And you're reciting to yourself. So that's a method that they use that's very effective. Whether it's mnemonic or not, we're not sure, but it helps them clarify. So that's basically the auditory folks, right? And notice, no directions, no booklets, they're just talking to each other, right? Putting the furniture together. And of course, here we have people asking for directions. I assume because this young lady, I think, is rather attractive, the guy is actually going to ask her for directions. Otherwise, of course, we don't need to do that. But we have our monkey friends, and they're going to be talking too. So the idea, again, with these auditory folks is both ways. It goes both ways. Now, the visual learners, right? Again, very intuitive. What are they going to like? They're going to like pictures, designs, graphs, film, particularly film and video. There are cognitive theorists who believe that these folks think in pictures. So that what their operation is constantly doing is obviously going for the visual, and they're happy with that, but we're not, because we're teachers. Right? So we've got to turn into something else. Yes, you could do a painting or you could do a poster presentation. You scientists will do a lot of those at conventions, right? So we have to engage your visual side. But it seems like there is some heavy operation translating from the visual to the more analytical, maybe even to the semiotic. So it's a really iffy operation with these folks. Maps, obviously, spatial relationships, they're great with. Art, and the interesting thing, and this is what kind of brought some of this sense of what these folks are like, was the idea that these people like to silent study. And the feeling was that operation of trying to make sense of the visual in ways that we as teachers ask for it, is kind of a heavy operation. So these folks are very, very introspective. They really kind of grind stuff out, but they really notice stuff, right? So they're very good at comparisons. So here's your IKEA directions, right? We've got a few numbers and a couple of little bits, and we're missing the Allen wrench, but I've got 75,000 of those at home. And again, very few words, but the pictorial representation makes good sense to these folks. They don't need more. And again, they're going to use maps in the traditional way. And I think it's, we're still trying to teach Washoe how to read, and we're not doing so well with it. But notice also here, these folks are creating, right? So remember, with all of these, they go both ways. It's not just that they watch visual stuff, they like to work visually, right? That's why I have the apes up there painting. All right, third group. What's the difference between the visual and the visual auditory? It's very simple, one word, they read. Now you might say, well, that's great, right? That makes they've got a pretty broad range of abilities to apply at least two large categories. Actually, it kind of complicates things, because they're actually more driven in the visual to go beyond what they're simply seeing and have to try to quote-unquote translate it. Writing is very big for these folks, even though they're visual. Remember that characters are still a form of art, a form of calligraphy. You should write on the blackboard for these folks. They like to see stuff on the boards, right? Outlines. There may be no other genre as indicative of a visual auditory learner than an outline. Think about what an outline is, right? It's written information arranged spatially. So they love outlines. And they will take and create very, very good ones, right? I tend to have my kids write abstracts just to get them in the habit of writing abstracts for their papers, and often these students will prefer to write outlines of their papers, preliminary outline before they start writing. Lecture notes. There is no requirement, and don't let any student tell you, right? There is no requirement that you put your notes on the system for them to see. Those are your lecture notes, but they will take amazing lecture notes, right? Because they're trying to ride this line between the visual and the auditory. So they're going to try to get everything down they can. And they're pretty good at it, but they're also going to freak out trying to do it, generally speaking. And so will you, right? When you sit in these seminar classes, believe me, I've done it 9 times. Film they like, video, and again, silent study, because these folks tend to, again, be wrestling with this kind of complex operation. Now, right? Anybody recognize what this is? This as a teaching style? It's what we've been doing for hundreds of years, isn't it, right? I'll give you the lecture, I'll put you up pictures so you can see what it looks like. Come back to me in 2 weeks and take the test. If you want, I have office hours. Otherwise, kid, you're on your own. Now, most of us have prospered in this way, right? I mean, all of you sitting here have been able to master this, and so have I, but I'm not this kind of learner. Basically, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be doing what you're doing. I'll show you why in a minute. But the idea here, right, is that these folks, even though this is the most traditional method of teaching, we're only teaching to this kind of really already conflicted group. What do the pure visual people do? They'll catch some of it, but the auditory stuff will fly by them. And then we got my favorite group, but before I get to them, so these folks will read the directions, right? Because they want to make sense of things, they can go to the written word, and they don't need the pictorial. So here's your written directions, right? And I'm actually a little bit like this. I love maps, but I don't work with them so well. I make a lot of mistakes. This stuff I know. Tell me when to turn right. And of course now, as I said, we have Garmin and Voices, so now the auditory people like us are really happy too. And again, we still got our monkeys trying to figure things out. Okay, this is pretty much where I sit, right? These are my favorite folks anyway. And this is one of your worst problems as teachers, right? So, what do tactile kinesthetic people like to do? They like to be physically engaged. They don't want to sit here listening to a lecture, no matter how well it's delivered. They want hands-on learning. They love moving things. Okay, now all you scientists are like, yeah, I'll just show them in the lab and it'll be great. There's only one problem. You may want them to do some kind of cell experiment, and they're like So they're going to work really hard, and they're going to love it, but you got to give them a little direction. If you turn them loose in the lab, they may end up discovering cold fusion, right? But that's not what you want them to do. So these people will really, really get motivated. If you give them hands-on work, have them teach other folks, figure things out, have them do demonstrations, right? Have them do presentations. I had a group of students this summer. I just finished teaching the summer bridge class. They're going to be, probably some will be your freshmen in a couple weeks, right? And I had a group of 4 young ladies in one section, and they were all kinesthetic. And their presentations were off the clock. They did skits, they had songs, they had poetry, they had diagrams, they had posters. They used the media.